Thank you all for coming. I hope you're at the planning commission. If not, it will be fun. Let's start with,
Ron Santos.
here.
Mike Kerr.
Here.
Tom McKeon will be absent. Eric Oxenchuk will be absent. John Woodward.
Here.
Do we close the door or leave it open?
Here.
Right.
Okay, now we're into the public comment phase of the meeting. Anyone that has a public comment?
Would you mind letting Chris make a statement quick about the agenda and I think the zoning ordinance amendment versus what I think a lot of people think we're gonna be talking about today?
All right.
Brandon is West Virginia University, wants to go to law school, and he's working with me this summer. He's going to see what my home meetings are. So the statement that I want to make is, I understand from the borough manager that there are a number of people here today who are residents of the development that is located behind a location which is part of a zoning ordinance amendment that the borough is considering. I want to make it clear to all of you that adoption of that ordinance does not approve any specific project. In order for a developer to take advantage of any regulation under the zoning ordinance, they would need to bring a project to the township. Under this particular regulation, a conditional use hearing by the borough council is necessary for any development under that particular regulation. There are many regulations in the zoning ordinance that allow a project to proceed without a hearing for the specific project. Because of the borough council anticipating that this would be an interest to the neighborhood, when this regulation was drafted, there was a provision included in the regulation that would require a conditional use hearing, which means that the borough council would conduct a public hearing. There would be advertised notice to residents in the area of the project before any project could proceed under that regulation. In addition to that process for zoning approval, it would also be necessary for what we call a land development plan to be submitted to the borough to be reviewed by this planning commission and ultimately approved by the borough council. All of those steps would be necessary before any project could potentially receive permits. So I just want you to be aware that the regulation provides a path for a project to potentially move forward, but it is not the same thing as granting the right to any developer to build that project. And there are many steps, several of which would require notice to all of you before the project could be considered for approval. So I just want to make you aware that the action that could be considered by the planning commission with regard to a recommendation on this ordinance is only a step in a very lengthy process before there is any specific project that would be approved. And I just want to lastly say, we don't have any application received by the borough for a specific project. It has not been received, it has not been reviewed. So there is no specific project that is under consideration next to your development.
Okay, so,
Yeah. And just to confirm, you're speaking to the residents of the Valley Green Homeowners Association.
That's who I'm addressing with all these comments, yes.
Thank you.
What is the
okay,
ordinance?
so,
What's the ordinance number? Is it the one that's on here?
No.
Or is it
It is the ordinance that's on the agenda for
Yeah.
discussion today, yes.
1440-2024?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
okay, does anyone have any questions, public comments on this? Would be a good time to ask. Yes.
I think there's just a lot of concern.
Would you give us your name?
Oh,
and
I'm sorry.
address,
Aurora Cardy. And what else did you?
Address.
Oh, address, 1910 Square Road, Wyomissing. I just think there's, you know, a lot of concern, from the residents, for a lot of reasons, from what's been said that could be projected there, such as a 6-story building. It's just so massive. I know one thing that I thought of is, the school is on the other side of Valley Green Village. There are already people who walk from State Hill and cut through, you know, to get to the other side. And if there are children as residents in this apartment building, I am very sure that rather than a parent drive them in a car, upload them and come around, they are just possibly gonna, you know, walk through. Some of them may be smaller children, it is an elementary school, and they could be walked with a parent, but we know, you know, some people may let their child just walk through by themselves. And any resident could be backing up, and God forbid something happened. That is just a big concern. You know, I just don't know how something that size with all the vehicles, if there's 144 units there, if there's 2 drivers in each unit, that's 288 cars. Even if there are some non-drivers, drop it down a little bit, 250, 225. I think that's a lot of cars to have that amount. I don't even think that you have that for parking in an area like that. Just don't.
yes.
I have a question, sir. My name is Jill Hole. I live at 158 Valley Green Circle. Did you hear that? I'm
Yes,
sorry,
yes.
it's a big room. My question is when you said in your statement that we would be contacted, how are we going to be contacted? Where should we look for that information?
Michelle, do you want to speak on the process that the borough follows?
Under the municipality's planning code, we are required to advertise that public notice in the Reading Eagle 1 week and 2 weeks prior to the date of the hearing, post the subject property with a laminated copy of the public notice 2 weeks out from the date of the hearing, as well as send mailed by USPS individual copies of that notice to every property owner that abuts the subject property within at least a 300-foot radius. I typically go more for 500 feet just to make sure everyone's covered.
Almost everybody in our community would get a notice.
Correct. Mailed to whatever address is on the tax record. So
Right.
if you reside there, but your mail goes somewhere else for the tax record, it would go to the other address.
For me personally, not for the company. So that is what I needed to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you don't really need us here for this. We may stay if we want to listen, but this is not regarding any of the
Well,
possible
Yeah,
future usage.
I don't want to discourage you from being here.
Oh, I'm gonna
I mean,
be here for a
certainly you
couple
have
minutes.
every right to be here, and there'll be interesting discussion today. But there is no specific project, so, you know, the
Okay.
concern about a 6-story project, I don't know if there'll be a 6-story project. We don't have any specific project that has been submitted to the borough. I certainly think you have an interest in the outcome if there is a project that's proposed. You know, just some general comments. The borough has been proactive in promoting redevelopment, and you see that in the community, along Park Road, in this neighborhood especially. The borough has looked to try to also promote redevelopment along State Hill Road through this proposed ordinance that is under consideration. And there are certainly benefits to all the residents of the borough to keep your taxes down by promoting the creation of new assessed value in the community. The Berkshire Mall used to have a high assessed value, used to generate a lot of tax revenue. That tax revenue has evaporated. There's very little relative to the historic tax revenue that the borough received from that property that is now being generated. So what the borough's redevelopment efforts have done is to replace some of the properties that have lost value for tax purposes with new development. And the ordinance that's under consideration is part of a strategy to try to continue to build the tax base in the borough with properties that are, you know, I would say, ripe for redevelopment, and that restaurant property adjacent to you, I think you would agree, is not what it once was in terms of being a valuable property in the community. So promoting redevelopment of that is a goal of the borough, along with other properties in other locations around the borough. But there is no specific project, so if you are most eager to give us feedback on a specific project, stay tuned, and when a specific project, if one does come in under this regulation, if this regulation is approved by the borough, which has not yet happened, then I would certainly think you would want to be part of those discussions and give us input on how you think that might impact you. And you know, what we have seen with other projects, like there was an apartment project that was proposed on, was it Van Reed Road? Is that the right? Okay. We had considerable input from neighbors about how to mitigate the perceived negative impacts from that project. And I think those comments from the neighbors improved that project so that if and when that project is built, it'll be a better project. And I would certainly encourage you to have the same input if there is a project proposed in the location where your community is located, that you would be able to have input.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Pat Wade, president of the Valley Green Homeowners Association. First of all, I was told to come to this meeting. When I went to well, first of all, I was at the zoning meeting for the barber shop, and then I was told to go to the traffic circle meeting, which I did, and then I was told to come here. So that's that. That's why I'm here. Second of all, we have received our property managers received a blueprint from about that piece of property that says it has 3 sinkholes on it, and that our property, our retention pond, is responsible for the sinkholes. That is why I'm here, among other reasons. But this whole area is sinkholes. I personally contacted the borough last summer. There are 2 sinkholes on the sidewalks of State Hill Road and between Vista and Kingsway Drive. And there's a huge sinkhole at the top of the mattress property on Berkshire Plaza. And then, of course, Redner's Shopping Center has a huge sinkhole, had one, they had to fix it. And then at the corner of Wingate and Lawndale, there was a sinkhole. So we were sent a statement saying, your retention pond is responsible for sinkholes. Now, I am not really sure who the heck sent it to me or to the property managers, but we received that, and the area is full of sinkholes, so I don't know how you can say that Valley Green Village is responsible for sinkholes in the parking lot of Berkshire Family Restaurant.
We'll take a look at that ourselves, Pat, and make our own assessment as to whether or not we think we're responsible.
For the purview of the planning commission, that's a separate issue. The borough has a standalone sinkhole ordinance that says when we're notified that a sinkhole's opened up, we have to send notice to the owner. So there's a sinkhole on the Berkshire property, not in the parking lot, it's actually in the retention basin. And the stormwater from Valley Green flows to the retention pond on the Berkshire restaurant property. Additionally, another notice was sent to a property owner on Woodland whose rear yard ties into that parking lot as well. So, just so the borough are doing what we need to, every impacted property owner was sent a copy of the notice.
We did not get that. We did not get copies of that, other than through email.
Well, that's because the sinkhole isn't actually on your property.
And the retention pond is ours, it is not the restaurant's. The retention pond, not the swale that goes from the retention. The retention pond is ours. It's on the blueprints of our property lines.
Okay, well, again, not per se under the purview of the planning commission or something that they would weigh in on, but Jim Babb, our public works director, would be your contact
Okay.
for that letter. He would have been who sent that letter.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am.
Melissa Wells, we have a property in Birdland and also at Valley Green Village. I have a question, pardon me?
Your address?
1504 Meadowlark Road and 130 Valley Green Village. I have a question about the ordinance. Is the ordinance being considered such that should it pass, no further zoning approvals are necessary to redevelop the particular property that the Valley Green homeowners are asking about? In other words, it would allow for a mixed use or perhaps an investment of an apartment building such as what we're hearing word of, without having further hearings to consider the use of the property.
You may have missed my introduction.
I probably did because I was standing behind the door.
Okay.
So I apologize if I couldn't hear you.
All right. It is a part of this regulation that any project which would propose to utilize these regulations is required to participate in a conditional use hearing before the
Okay.
Borough Council. So there would be a hearing with public notice. The neighborhood would receive notice, and all of you could participate in that hearing and give the Borough Council feedback on the proposed project. So this regulation creates the possibility of a project, but there are many steps that would be necessary before any permits could be issued, and that zoning hearing process is a critical step in which input from the neighbors would be an essential part of the deliberation by the Borough Council. And then in addition to that, there is a land development planning process, which is also a public process that the Planning Commission is involved in. So there are a number of different steps that are necessary. The regulation makes a project possible, but it is not the approval of any specific project, and any specific project must go through a public hearing.
Okay, that's a relief. I am cognizant of the need for additional revenue in the borough, and no one wants to pay more taxes, but we certainly, I would appreciate another opportunity to look at what is happening there, because I share the concerns of some of our fellow Valley Green Village residents.
Yes.
Is the conditional use hearing the only time they will be able to give any?
Well, that is.
Because that seems to be the first step, I apologize.
Right, that's
Is that right?
a
Okay.
very significant step, but during that land development planning process,
After,
it
right.
is also possible for neighbors to have
Okay.
input, but that is more on technical issues like stormwater management, paving, the physical construction, technical aspects of the project. The actual use and the density of the use and, the number of apartments, that's all part of the zoning process, and the conditional use is where that part of the project would be discussed.
Would you mind explaining to them that they might get parties and what that means at conditional use?
Okay. At the beginning of the public hearing, I will make a series of statements about how the process is going to be conducted. One of those statements that I will make at the public hearing is that if you wish to present testimony and you wish to have the right to appeal the decision of the Borough Council, you would be required to tell us that you wish to be considered a party to the hearing. And if you request party status, then you can present testimony, you can cross-examine the witnesses of the applicant, and you can appeal the decision. If you don't request party status, you would still be given an opportunity to make public comment, but you wouldn't have the legal rights that a party has with regard to testimony or appeal. It's also advisable, especially if you have a homeowners association. I don't know if you have regular legal counsel or not, but you might want to be a representative. That is a priority for your group. It's something for you to consider.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name's Carol, better known as Chip Fawcett, and I'm at 127 Valley Green Circle, treasurer and past president. One of our primary concerns about the proposed project is recognition that Kings Way, which is the road between the restaurant and the adjacent strip mall, Berkshire Plaza, we would like it understood, recognized that that is our private road. And while we are open to negotiation regarding use or access to the road, we again assert that it would be our right to approve any use or access to Kings Way. In that regard, we sent a letter to the mayor on April 12th. It's been acknowledged by the mayor's office. Michelle?
Yeah, well,
Okay,
I'm the borough manager, I responded on his behalf.
Thank you very much. The letter was acknowledged by the mayor's office, and I'm wondering, would it be worthwhile for me to give a copy to the planning council?
I have a copy electronically.
Okay.
Just to share with you as well, the developer that's expressed interest in potentially redeveloping that property has been notified and is fully aware that Kingsway is a private road, that they would need to speak to the homeowners association for any type of access easement to use that for
Okay.
access.
Thank you.
Is the strip
That's comforting. Thank
The
you.
strip mall has access easement.
Because
I also informed PennDOT that it was their road,
Yes.
because PennDOt thought it was,
The
I'm
boroughs.
the borough engineer, PennDOt thought it was our road, the borough's road, and we told them it's not our road, it's your private road, and you've granted rights to the shopping center to use it as well.
Yes.
Well, that depends on meeting that, spend a lot of time.
Trying to
getting
convince
around
them.
PennDOT.
And actually, there's a whole document I have on this that was.
Well, I told them in a year ago.
For the,
But who are you?
the driveway into the shopping center, and we get
Any
paid
other
every month
questions
from
from
that.
anyone in the?
I mean, it's on their land development plan from the 70s. It's clear that there is a dedicated
Okay.
access easement there.
So you're welcome to stay, you're not going to stay, now would be a good time to depart. If you're interested in applying, you'll get
I don't know if everybody heard that.
Thank you for coming.
Bye-bye. Thank you. You don't have to stay here. I heard something about hearing, but if you want to learn a little bit. Part about all of that is. And I We're going. I can take her home if she wants. Yeah, I'll take you. What about Joey? Joey, come home with you. What about?
Unless if you need
Where is Daddy? Where's Daddy? Are you gonna take like
Good to
see you.
I
was like, that's where you're
That was gentle public
Can you go
comment.
home and Alicia? Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll stay. I'll be good. I'm my husband. Goodbye.
Tear it down and put it behind it. And also nobody knows anything about it.
Out of the way, let more people in.
Thank you. I'll be gone.
I was gonna say, that whole property is
Okay, this first thing on our agenda this afternoon is a zoning ordinance amendment. Refer to my right here, Chris.
All right, thank you, Chairman. On your agenda this afternoon is the proposed amendment to the zoning ordinance regarding the State Hill Road redevelopment area. This ordinance draft has been before the Planning Commission previously. On the basis of the prior discussion by the Planning Commission, the draft ordinance was sent to the Berks County Planning Commission as required by the state planning code. We received a review letter from the county that included a number of comments on the draft ordinance. Most of them were of a very technical nature and did not go to the goals of the ordinance. With regard to the goals of the ordinance, the Berks County Planning Commission did indicate that the proposed amendment is consistent with the Berks County Comprehensive Plan 2030 update. So that means that the planning goals are consistent with the county planning documents. With regard to the specific comments, the one thing I did embrace was a revision to change the formatting a little bit of the use provisions to break it down into a number of different subsections so it is easier to manage the administration of the ordinance. That was a suggestion from the county. There were several comments in here that I did not feel were appropriate. For example, they're recommending that we show the Reading Airport overlay on our zoning map. There is no possibility that a building could be tall enough in this location to come into those airport regulations. And in my opinion, it would simply clutter our already dense zoning map. So that's an example of a regulation or a recommendation that I am not suggesting that the council or the planning commission incorporate.
Chris, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
But we referenced that somewhere in the ordinance.
Oh, yeah, sure. We have a whole
We have an
section.
overlay
There's a
map.
whole
We have an
there's a
airport
whole
overlay
section.
map.
Okay,
too.
all right.
Yeah. So, I mean, the
Just not
regulations.
on this.
That's fine. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we need to layer up the.
I would agree. I would agree.
So, there is a very significant specific change in this version of the ordinance that actually has nothing to do with the location that the neighbors down by the restaurant are concerned about. And that is at the end of Wellington Boulevard, we had a request from a neighbor who is operating a business that is on your agenda today, which is the State Hill Craft Cocktails and Kitchens business. And they're asking for a property that is adjacent to their existing business, but is zoned residential to be rezoned as part of the borough's C1 neighborhood commercial district. The consequence of that change in the zoning designation for that residential property would be to enable the business to expand into that additional lot. The Economic Development Committee, I think it was that committee, recommended that this change in the zoning designation of that one residential lot be added to this ordinance. So the ordinance that is before you includes that amendment to the zoning map to change the designation for the residential lot at the end of Wellington Boulevard to become a commercial lot. I understand that they already have this under agreement. They may, I don't know, they may
They
have
own
been
it.
purchased. They own it. Okay, so obviously the owner of this property is not objecting to this proposed change. So the zoning map that is attached to the draft ordinance would include that change of the designation of that one lot at the end of Wellington, as well as to add to the zoning map the State Hill Road Overlay District, including that particular lot, along with the other areas that are already zoned neighborhood commercial along State Hill Road. The other substantive provisions of the regulation are not changed in this draft. This ordinance would still provide, as we previously discussed, for mixed use along State Hill Road in the C1 district. If someone applies to the borough for a conditional use approval and can comply with all the various regulations regarding parking and setbacks and height. So, are there any comments or questions from the planning commission that I could entertain at this time?
I've got some typo on 3, not ridiculous, 2.
That's the one I already fixed first.
Yeah, that one is already
Now,
done. Thank you.
sure. I do think that the county had a point about breaking up the ordinance in smaller chunks, so it's easier to figure out where you fall and then ask that you take another look at that. I also think the county had a nice comment about a chart where you could fill in where you fell in different things. I'm going to ask you to consider that. I know the provision of office, retail, professional services on the first floor and apartments above is not new. And approved before I became on council. I don't understand why we require that. I don't understand what's the benefit of that versus simply having an apartment. Maybe that's not the discussion for today.
Well,
Tell us what page you're on.
This one, made it page 3.
well, I would say the mixed use concept respects the current zoning for the zoning district where this project could be located, in that the ground floor is presently commercial or restaurant or office in this zoning district. And so that commercial feel for the ground floor would continue to be permitted in a mixed use project. But above that is where the residential would be located. So I think it's the intention of sort of the live, work, play kind of concept is where the mixed use with the commercial or retail on the ground floor and the apartment above it is intended to provide that lifestyle. But this regulation does permit exclusively residential projects in that State Hill Road redevelopment area. It is not required that it be a mixed use in that particular redevelopment area. And did the planning commission get the revised version that did break down the use sections into the various subsections? I think you did. Yeah, you do have that, because that's what this is a breakdown into all these various subsections down to, there are actually 8 of them now for the State Hill Road redevelopment area, whereas that was a single paragraph in the prior version of this ordinance. So there is a lot more breakdown in terms of, again, easing the administration of the regulation.
You seem to address structured parking on State Hill the best, especially to define it, where you have to be screened, but I don't understand why that concept doesn't fall through that structured parking.
Well, all of the redevelopment areas have a preference for structured parking as a way to get more of the parking under the building, and rather than having, massive parking lots. So this structured parking concept is part of all of the redevelopment areas.
So it seems, and I couldn't, my eyes were glazing over, I admit that I probably checked out long before I finished, but in 4.2 on page 5, that's the only time I saw structured parking is not subterranean, must be screened by louvers. I don't know why it's only there.
Because we added that, so to give you a little bit more background on this, remember in 2018-2019, we had a master plan study performed of Pennant Park. So the original overlay for areas 1, 2, and 3 was a recommendation from that consultant to basically answer the question of, we have medical school coming to the community, what uses typically go along with that, and what should we be prepared for in the next 5 to 10 years of development spurring out of that medical school. So that was the impetus to do areas 1, 2, and 3, and then when we talked about trying to encourage redevelopment on State Hall Road, it was, instead of creating this whole separate ordinance for an overlay, let's roll it into the existing overlay that was in place for the Pennant Park redevelopment areas, and those are in primarily commercial zoning districts versus we know the State Hill Road overlay is directly adjacent to residential zoning districts and properties. So the idea was to put that extra requirement to screen any type of structured parking from the adjacent residential properties to give a little bit extra layer of buffer that they're not potentially gonna be seeing from their backyard or elsewhere somebody's parking garage.
Thank you. There's been a great deal of frustration that folks aren't required to submit renderings.
Right.
And I don't know what this is the place to put it, but,
Place to start.
It is
It's
required
in
in
that
here.
one, it's required in that.
is it?
Yes.
The CNO requires, any of the project that requires conditional use has to submit renderings as well as floor plans.
If you look at the top of page 6, it's at the end of subparagraph 7 of the State Hill Road redevelopment area regulation. And that
Right there.
sentence says, the conditional use application shall include site plans, elevation drawings of the proposed building or buildings, and an artist's rendering showing the proposed building or buildings in the context of the surrounding neighborhood. So that's where we are, requiring them to show us what it's gonna look like, so that,
But is it only for that, the one that wasn't always?
uh,
Why only there?
well, again, I think it's similar to, well, I would just reiterate what Michelle said. This is the only one of the 4 redevelopment areas that has a lot of adjacent residential development, and we are particularly concerned about fitting it into a neighborhood where there's more residential already existing.
I understand that, but there was a lot of comment about that abomination with the car wash.
Well,
And abominations being polite. And I think people wished that we had seen a rendering of it. I don't know that it
Okay.
would affect
Well-
any decision, but
okay, that, I think, is a very legitimate comment, but the place for that to fit in is actually the subdivision and land development ordinance. If you want to require renderings for, commercial projects anywhere in the borough, it would have to go into that subdivision and land development ordinance, because that project did not require any zoning approval. It was the same use that was there before, but they did have a land development plan that came through the planning commission. And as you say, we never saw what it would look like, when they went through that 2-dimensional plan review process. So, that would be the place to add the kind of regulation that you're asking for.
thank you. My final comment has to do with 5 Wellington. I personally do not think that it ought to be expanded to include that property as proposed. Tearing down that the way that business is configured right now, there's somewhat of a barrier between that and the residential area. And what the business owner is proposing is, I guess, raising that house and putting what my guess is about 30 parking spaces, which would be adjacent to the residential area. My concern is what happens when the business closes and 10, 20 people come out to their cars. They're talking, they're turning on their cars, the radios are going on, the lights are popping into the neighbor's bedroom. the ordinance says that one of our jobs is to protect the welfare of the public. And by protecting 5 Wellington, that certainly protects the business owner. But it would be a horror for the people who live nearby. And there are adjacent properties for sale. I'm sympathetic to the business. They could move over there, and that's not helping the tax base. But allowing that property to be grazed and put a substantial parking lot in there will just be awful for the people who live nearby. So I ask that it not be expanded to include that.
Jana, we did talk about that at length at the Economic Development Committee meeting.
Yes, I was there.
Um,
I spoke up there too.
Just,
So I have a question, to Jana's point, I would think the only person, an expert of taking a house down and making additional parking. It's a good thing for the business, and I think it would be a great thing for this business. And I'm all for it, except for one thing. Have we heard from the people at 9 Wellington Boulevard? Have they weighed in on this at all?
the applicant / property owner and his representative is here. If my memory serves me from the Economic Development Committee meeting, there was a conversation that took place with that adjacent property owner, and Chuck shaking his head yes. So I'll wait for Chuck to address that when we get to that item on the agenda, but yes, that conversation has taken place.
Because I think at the time I did it, I owned the adjacent property to the one that I made the parking lot into. So the only person that would have a problem, I would think, now I don't live over there obviously, but you know, Janet's right. I think it'll be good for the rest of the neighborhood if 9's okay with it. You know, that's,
Well, there are parking issues on the street because of
Yeah, I know.
the overflow parking.
I've been there.
And
You read his blog, and that 14 cars were parked at the house, the limits for sale next to it. Parking spot. But that's not the solution.
That's the best one probably,
It's
if it works.
the cheapest for the business. I'm not convinced it's best for the neighborhood, I'm concerned about what does.
Chris, along those same lines, or sort of, in including that property, if we were to recommend that, does it create any other problems along that line? We've talked about a couple of, at least one of those properties that kind of comes down, although it wasn't right on Stanton Road, where someone wanted to do something with it, and we recommended against that. Does it create any issues that go beyond that one lot, inconsistencies?
That was along Vista Road, which we
Yeah, it was.
excluded that, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's,
the one.
that,
Yeah.
well, if you look at the zoning map, the end of Vista is not commercial, and Planning Commission and Council have never agreed to change the zoning at the end of Vista in order to maintain that residential entrance off of State Hill Road. I think there are rational reasons to treat Vista differently than Wellington. You know, the Wellington, I don't think is, you know, there's an existing business there that has specific needs that can be addressed with the zoning change that's under consideration. We don't have a situation like that at the end of Vista. And also, I just want to mention, the Wellington project is not a redevelopment project. That is, the use of that property is consistent with the C1 zoning, so there wouldn't be a conditional use hearing. It would be just a matter of them going through this land development planning process, where we have a plan pending today for the Planning Commission to discuss. So the fact that that lot is included in this ordinance doesn't mean that the expansion of the business at the end of Wellington is a redevelopment project. It's not. And through this land development process that is pending before the Planning Commission, you're going to have an opportunity to look at screening or other ways to mitigate the impact on the neighbors. You know, land development, I think, is an appropriate process for that kind of limited impact management. I think you can do something about that here at the planning commission.
Well, I think they're also improving the driveway situation, because right now you have to make a U-turn to get into the driveway, and so this is gonna be right off of, okay, yeah.
Yeah, there are safety issues, there's on-street parking issues, there are a number of factors that are affected by this project.
But it should also
The new
be
drive.
solved by the other different,
Which one is that, John?
grade,
To the south or east.
I mean, along State Road.
here, here. That's the two buildings next to it, for sale on State Road.
Wellington Boulevard focused this morning.
Yeah, no, there's no question that the proposal includes a lot of things. But to me, and it's no for anybody living there, with all those cars, all the noise and all the lights and. It's not good.
Yes. Now, because of the Wellington Boulevard lot, this is gonna have to go to county planning one more time because this is a substantive change in the ordinance at that lot. But otherwise, if the planning commission takes action to recommend it, it would just go to council and we would get that county planning cycle. Well, this either has to have a zoning amendment or they need a variance from the zoning. Well, you can't discuss it.
All right, so the first thing we need is a motion to approve, table, or deny the recommended council authorization, advertisement, adoption of ordinance 1440/2024, and the update zoning map. Do I have a motion to accept? I'll make that motion. Motion to approve, do I have a second?
Second.
Second, any questions?
If the State Hill moves in a different direction and they decide to purchase an alternate property instead, this residential falls into that overlay district, are there any negative ramifications if it stays residential and it's included in the street?
No, if that lot can continue to be used as a residential lot, it would be, I don't know, is residential allowed in the C1?
Yes, by right.
Okay, so it doesn't change the rights to use that property as a residential use.
Okay, any other questions?
So what's the recourse if we approve this new situation here? What's the recourse for the people at 9 Wellington Boulevard going forward? We're gonna talk about that later.
That's next on the agenda.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Opposed, one. Okay, motion's carried. Next item is the Wellington Boulevard issue 4, just kind of what we just talked about, right? So, we talk about that a little more, item 4.
Chuck, do you wanna?
Sure, absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chuck France. I'm with CTC Design Group. I'm here on behalf of the applicant. There's been some discussion already, so I won't get into the specifics of location and where the project is located. I think everybody's familiar with where the project is located. You've even gotten into some of the zoning background as well. The existing property where State Hill Craft Cocktails and Kitchen is located is in the C1 zoning district. That property is about 6/10 of an acre. The property in question is the Gantner property. That's located just to the south of the existing restaurant. Pointer here, I'm gonna, guess I'll point to this one right here. So the area where the parking lot is located.
On the big screen.
There we go. There we go, thank you. So the area where the existing residential lot is located down here, where the parking lot's gonna be located, That existing residential is in the R1A district. It's about 4/10 of an acre. The idea is that we would consolidate the two properties as part of this land development plan. So at the end of the day, you'll end up with a property that's a little less than 1 acre of land. Yeah, as discussed, there is a request which the Planning Commission had just considered regarding the change in zoning ordinance or the zoning map. The zoning map would essentially change the R1A into the C1, which would allow the parking lot to be a by right use rather than going through, as Chris had mentioned, having to go through a use variance for that particular use. What's being proposed then is obviously the residential structure that's located there would be demolished. The parking lot would go essentially on that area where the residence is located now. So the primary purpose and what the owner, what Bill's been looking to do here since he acquired the property, is try to find some additional off-street parking. Bill does recognize that parking is something that needs to be looked at for the property, and then also circulation. It gets a little tricky sometimes behind the restaurant as well, trying to get out. So Bill had us look at actually a couple of different properties, evaluate some options. When the property to the south became available, Bill took the opportunity to go ahead and acquire that property as it made a good connection. In addition to the additional parking that you're going to see here, which is about 33 additional spaces, you're also going to end up with a relocation of the entrance, which the current entrance is sort of up here towards the divider. And as if you've gone there, you kind of understand the situation. It's a little tricky to get in if you're coming from State Hill Road. You got to come down Wellington, kind of come around the median here and get back in. Likewise, if you're leaving, if you wanted to go back towards Drexelwood, you go south. Two things happen. Either you go out to State Hill Road, you make the right, and you find your way back, or you will just wait till it's clear and make a left out of the entrance and come down Wellington. So one of the other nice benefits of this is that we're going to end up with more of an aligned access point to the intersection here so that traffic can make both a right in and then a left out of the parking lot. So as I mentioned before, there's about 36 parking spaces currently. This is going to add about 33. So we're going to need ballpark about 69 spaces total that'll be located on the property. You'll notice there is a fair amount of landscaping that's being proposed along the southern edge here as a double row of evergreens. Bill has been in touch with the property owner that's located to the south here. He is in discussion with them. Everything in the initial discussion seemed good. They were having some discussion about maybe some fence improvements and how they were going to handle that buffer between the two. So at this point, Bill is still having conversation with the owner, but it doesn't appear that there's anything adversarial at this point as far as any of the conversations he's had with the property owner. I think that's it for an overview, unless I'm missing anything. To give you an update on where we stand with some of the other approvals, we did receive a letter from the Berks County Planning Commission. I pretty much referred to that as standard comments that were in the review letter from the county. We also did submit to the Conservation District. This would require an adequacy letter, not necessarily an NPDES permit. We did receive technical comments from the County Conservation District, so we'll be in the process of cleaning that up and getting it back in. We also have a review letter from Jim's office, which is a couple pages. Went through the review letter though, and didn't really see anything that was any concern on our end. I think there are a couple items that may be appropriate for the Planning Commission to discuss here this afternoon. But I would defer to the Planning Commission and Jim as far as how you'd like to do that. If there are any comments that you would like to review, you can go ahead and do that. I'll answer any questions that you may have, and then I'll just make sure some of the comments that I have circled eventually get discussed too.
In terms of that buffer area, what are you showing on the current version of the plan? I see the planting, is that what you're showing at this time?
Yes, so what we're showing right now is a double row of evergreens that would be planted there. I think there's 23 in total, so they'd be staggered rows that would be placed between the parking lot and the existing property. property. There is an existing fence that's located here as well. It's basically along the property line. I think that's one of the items that Bill is having a conversation with the property owner about regarding the condition of that fence and what happens to the fence with respect to the landscaping that's going to be put there as well.
Kind of
Leyland Cypress.
the trees.
Leyland Cypress is
Yeah. And we can, I think that's gonna have to be conversation with the property owner, conversation with the planning commission. You know, I think the species itself, we can have discussion with and make sure, everybody's happy with what we're showing there. The idea is that they, would be evergreen so that, winter time, you're not gonna be looking through. Yeah.
What about noise abatement?
And there's not much you can do on the noise abatement, again, except for, planting the landscaping there, I understand that's not a sound barrier. But at least trying to give as much space as possible, between the property line and the parking lot area. There's really not much more, in that regard.
Chuck, what are the hours of operation for the restaurant?
I don't recall off the top of my head, Michelle.
Google it quickly.
Where is is the main entrance into the restaurant at the same location?
It's gonna be down here.
No, I meant to the building.
Oh, to the building, yes,
In the
yes. Just to speak on the addition then, that's a good question. This is kind of where we show the addition right now. Bill is currently working on a plan to actually have a footprint for the proposed addition. It's probably likely gonna be more sort of in this area. It's probably not gonna go across the full portion of the property. But I think he's contemplating at this point more of like a Four Seasons kind of room. Something that you could close up in the winter time, maybe have open in the summer.
The main entrance is on
Stay on State Hill Road.
State Hill
Yeah,
Road,
State Hill.
yes, yeah. The access to the building will not change.
So in case the planning commission's interested, they're open Monday and Tuesday 4 to 10, Wednesday 12 to 10, and that's PM to PM. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 12 PM to 12 AM, and then Sunday 10 AM to 10 PM. So really Thursday, Friday, Saturday are the nights they'd be open until midnight. Santino's was still too.
That's right.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I know you talked to the residents next to the property that you purchased, but what about across the street there on the corner of Abington and Wellington?
This property down here?
Yes.
I don't believe Bill has reached out to them.
Because they're gonna have a pretty view of your parking lot. Curious as to their thoughts.
So I assume that you'll be posting do not enter signs at that location. Because I have an issue with the circulation, but I understand what you did.
Yeah.
But as long as that's supposed to do not enter, I think it will work.
Yes, yes, you're right, there is gonna have to be some signing and some pavement markings to go in there and make sure that circulation's being followed. It's one of those things, Scott, once you do it once, it's gonna take a little while for everybody to understand how the circulation's gonna work. It's
Yeah.
gonna be a little different, we're sort of reversing it. We're following more of a clockwise or counterclockwise circulation pattern. A reason for that is mainly, when you're coming in, we didn't wanna have to go in this direction, there'd be another conflict point there.
Correct.
It's just easier for somebody to come in and keep going rather than having to wait to get.
It's quite a distance to get to the front door, though.
Yeah,
But
correct.
you know how lazy people are. We have people complaining they have to walk across the street to vote. To
Yeah.
get to the old Buddha
Sure,
shop. So
yeah,
the notion that people are going to keep going right to circulate to see if there's something out front, or they could take a left and get the quicker.
yeah. You're never gonna stop that, it's just, it happens everywhere.
So the fence that exists on that, in between those properties, is that on 5 Wellington or is that on 9 Wellington?
The fence that's down here is on 9 Wellington, kind of
Can you
see
move
it
that to
along
your
there.
property?
I think that's conversation that he's having right now with the property owner to see, what's gonna make everybody comfortable as far as where that fence is now, what it would be when he's, when the parking lot's in. So he's, at this point, having that conversation.
I think my recommendation would be that to provide some kind of fencing against the parking spaces and then put the landscaping, because that will also help with the sounds in the cars as well. Yeah.
So basically, Scott, parking, fence, landscaping.
Yes.
It's solid fence.
As long as it's
Yes.
maintained
Right.
landscaping.
Yeah, that's the problem going
So
forward,
probably
if that
fence.
fence is on the other side, is on the restaurant side of the landscaping, well, the restaurant owner will never see the landscaping because of the fence, and you won't know that it's overgrown or whatever. Now, I'd rather see the fence on the other side where it is now, but I don't know.
But I think that you want different fencing if you were, the fencing between two residences, I would think is going to be much different than fencing between the residents and 33 parking spaces. And I wouldn't want the poor person who lives at 9 to have to bear the expense of that upgrade. I don't think that's fair.
No, I don't think it's really, but,
Yeah, I think you need to come up with an alternative so we can look at it, but because there's conflicting opinions. on it.
But if we add that to the overlay, do we have any say to that?
They're not using the
We're not using the overlay.
regulations, so it would be the underlying zoning district, well, zoning ordinance
C1.
regulations. Well, just the zoning ordinance regulations in general, which allow for buffering, landscaping, fence requirements.
Jim's, your letter, Jim, I think,
Yeah.
has reference to the various
Yeah.
sections of the landscape buffer that we would have to meet, strictly from an ordinance perspective, but then what we're talking about here is going above and beyond the ordinance and making sure that the property owner is comfortable.
Yeah, but Jim's letter didn't mention anything about noise, and maybe we don't have, I know we don't have a
We
noise
don't have it.
ordinance, but I think that ought to be a concern for the neighbors.
We don't have a section though.
Right.
The only thing with the noise
We should,
issue
we don't.
is if they do an outdoor area. Because they were talking about a Four Seasons room.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, because when people leave the restaurant, say you lose a group of people, you go into your cars, people gonna be talking, they're gonna get in the car. The radios, I mean, boom, boom, boom. So there's a potential for a lot of noise from their customers when they're leaving. You know, I wouldn't wanna be having my window open in the summer.
I mean, the existing parking lot does project further. I mean, the person that lives there in, what is it, 5 Wellington, I mean, they have a parking lot in their backyard, so.
It's a long side.
Yeah.
There's that, but it's not.
It's 6 half dozen of the other.
Yeah, I think it's exponential.
I don't think the noise, issue would be as bad as you think it might be, Jana, but, just due to the hours of the operation. You know, if you got a place that's open up till 2 in the morning, those people will be coming out listening to loud music and
Yeah.
talking high, you know.
But they could change it to 2 AM.
Well, that's also true.
You've gotta pay for it somehow. So it's-
Yeah, very true.
I'd also like to see some more. What else we have covered, Jim? Some more landscaping?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, just to fill in that area,
Yeah.
because you've got the area between the proposed building and the parking lot, I'd like to.
Yeah, I think this is gonna
That's what
change
you
a little bit here once the final
Okay.
configurations and, yeah, point noted.
The lights for the parking lot, are they gonna be on 24/7? The illumination in the parking lot, or is there any overnight where the lights get turned off in the parking lot?
I'm not quite sure at this point what the plan would be. I mean, we still, one of Jim's comments as well is to submit a full lighting plan. We have
Okay.
not gotten that far yet. We're still getting to
The new energy com requires you to drop half of them out after like a half hour after you close,
Gotcha.
so. You can't have them all on anymore. when
And that
you
would also
do a major
address
renovation.
making sure we're not projecting light onto that neighbor property, everything
Correct.
as
We would
best
need to-
ability.
That's why we
In
wanted,
our
to
ordinance.
we wanted to see the full lighting plan to make sure that no lighting was going onto the residential property next door or out into the street, or even the rear property, although that's commercial, but we were more concerned with the residential property on Abington and, not Cheltenham. Or Wellington.
Yeah, the next plan that we would submit with the lighting would have photometrics listed on it and the intensities to make sure that we're meeting them. Basically at the property lines, so we're doing the proper cutoffs.
Thank you so much.
One of the things that Chuck and I discussed this afternoon is if the planning commission is agreeable to granting preliminary plan development, plan approval, it would not only be subject to the zoning map being formally adopted by council, but it would also be subject to a waiver request from the plan scale requirements of the subdivision and land development ordinance that is not on your agenda for today, so you can't take action on it, but I can put that under my manager's report for Borough Council for next week. Food for thought.
Well, that happens all the time, right?
Plan
The
scale?
plan
Yes.
scale? Yes. Whenever we change our subdivision ordinance, we're gonna allow all the normal engineering plan scales and not say they have to be 1:50.
So at final
After
plan,
30 years, yeah.
at final plan, we would address the screening
Landscaping, lighting.
and lighting, right?
So this is only preliminary.
This is preliminary plan.
All right.
Two step.
So
And
it's-
still subject to the zoning map, which allows it to happen by right.
And all comments.
it's all, is the screening and the lighting in your review letter, right, Jack?
Yes.
So, your motion could be to, consider granting conditional preliminary plan approval subject to, a waiver being granted on the plan scale by Borough Council and the zoning amendment being enacted by Borough Council to allow the use, and meeting the comments in Jim's review letter through the final plan process. Is that adequate? Okay.
All right, here we go.
The only thing I can say is that if I were the owner, you know, I would think that's a pretty big lot. I thought you'd get more parking spaces on there.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing that we run into is with the zoning requirements for open space, we have to stay at 20% open space. So we've done as much as we can to get the parking in and still meet the zoning requirement for
I
open
didn't have that
space.
problem. Yeah.
Chris effectively, I believe, made the motion.
I suggested the language of a.
Yes.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second that.
All right, so we need a motion to approve the waiver plan scale zoning amendment for.
Well, actually, that's, the plan scale is not on the agenda, that'll be addressed by council. And I think the motion covers,
And that's in 4C.
yeah, what I said was for 4C.
Subject to McCarthy's letter dated May 2nd and adoption of the zoning map.
Those are here. Yeah, but so you made that motion.
So it's already on the table? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? One opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We need a waiver to call it, so you can see it.
Yes, I know. Shall I jump right in?
Have at it.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Ryan Jennings. I'm with the law firm Unruh, Turner, Burke and Freeze. And I had submitted what's projected on the screens here by way of a written land development waiver request on behalf of my client, 2205 Ridgewood Partners LLC. As the Planning Commission and the Borough are aware, the 6-page letter kind of outlines the history of this particular parcel, the project, and the factual and legal bases for the request for the waiver. What we have here, just so everyone's aware, is an approximate 8-acre parcel at 2205 Ridgewood Road. It is where the Berks Technical Institute currently occupies that space. Their occupancy has become diminished over time, given their enrollment figures, whereby they were originally occupying the entirety of the building, which is an approximate 59,000 square foot existing building. It's been there for decades. The site operates nicely and isn't the subject of any enforcement action or neighbor complaints. What we are ultimately attempting to do
through these various public processes is to occupy the building, whereby 2 additional tenants have since been secured, commercial tenants, one being a healthcare for kids user, which is a daily care facility for medically dependent children. They would occupy about 6,600 square feet of that 59,000 square foot building. The other occupant is a daycare, Lightbridge Academy, which is a reputable daycare operator. They would occupy 12,300 square feet. So that Berks Technical Institute occupancy only comprises about 59% of the building. So there's a lot of usable space, there's a lot of impervious coverage on that site between the building itself and all of the vast parking. What I'd like to bring to the Commission's attention this afternoon is that we've already been through a very public zoning hearing process. We did not have any opposition along that path. We were granted the variance relief that we sought, as well as a special exception for the operation of those 2 uses, of those 2 proposed tenants. So why are we here? What do we need? Well, we're asking for a waiver of land development because of the 2 very minor modifications that are outlined on the plan that's being projected. There's a vestibule area at the top of the screen, the northern northwestern portion of that plan, which is just a modification for improvement of access and safety for that healthcare for kids proposed tenant. Very minor modifications to curbing, ramps, and that vestibule area, primarily for safety. The only other modification on the site, and it isn't even a modification of the existing building, so I'm not sure that it technically falls under the land development umbrella, but we want to be transparent and inclusive. It's an outdoor play area at that southern portion, which is just to facilitate that proposed daycare use. So those are the only modifications that are proposed for this site, for these projects. So the request, from my perspective, I see this as a very prime candidate for a land development waiver request. I know the borough's familiar with that process. I've outlined the legal bases under both Pennsylvania law and the borough's ordinance requirements for requesting that waiver of land development in that 6-page letter that I had produced just over a month ago. In jumping to the McCarthy Engineering Associates Inc. review letter, McCarthy, without putting words in their mouth or speaking for them, are supportive of the project. We've been working for several months now with McCarthy, with borough personnel. There is absolutely no objection to our request for the waiver of land development at this time. They produced a 2+ page review letter addressing our request, and at the end it really just summarizes that there's no objection to proceeding with the zoning and building permitting processes, which we would most definitely have to go through and would go through. But what we're proposing is a code compliant plan at this point. Just those very minor modifications that I've highlighted, and they basically condition their recommendation on 3 things. One is for an ESPC plan to be approved by the County Conservation District, which we are okay with. We will comply. The second is to install ADA compliant ramps along the property's frontage, which we are agreeable to and we will provide. So that too is a will comply type of review comment. The third one is really what we wanted to kind of discuss here and maybe spend a little more time on today, is the request for a queue or stacking analysis for the daycare use itself. We're not necessarily troubled by this review comment, but we don't think that it's necessary. And I'll allow Mr. Lowe here. He's the principal for 2205 Ridgewood. I'll allow him to kind of get into the details or answer any questions that the commission members might have. But as we see it, a queuing or a stacking analysis really isn't necessary. And I say that because that's for the daycare use located on the other side of the building. It really has nothing to do with the 2 areas of proposed site modification that we're looking to implement here. That's also kind of an operational or a use consideration. Again, we've already been before the zoning hearing board. We've already sought and obtained our relief for parking, and we've
provided testimony and evidence as to the actual daycare operations as far as pickup, drop-off. There will be, and Adam can confirm this, absolutely no queuing or stacking of cars for a pickup or drop-off type of scenario. For this daycare, and we're fine with the condition subjecting us to this, it is parents or guardians or whomever dropping the children off using the plentiful amounts of parking and walking or otherwise transporting the children into the building. There's no, go ahead, get out, kids, and run into the daycare. There's none of that for that site. That's not how this daycare, Lightbridge Academy, will be operating. That's not an industry standard. It's not something that we're interested in doing for this site. So that said, there will be no queuing. There will be no stacking. We're happy to provide, something ever so brief in writing to that effect. But we kind of take issue with that third of three engineering comment just because we don't think that it's relevant. And if it was, it would have been relevant at that zoning hearing process where we were talking about specifics for that daycare operation. So this is, I said, a prime candidate for a land development waiver. We're actually reducing the amount of impervious coverage at the site. The site has adequate sewer capacity, which has been verified through our engineering, which has been accepted by the borough's engineers. We're reducing impervious coverage. There's plentiful parking. So as I see it, this is a legitimate, reasonable request of the Borough Planning Commission at this time. We would respectfully request an approval of this written request, and we would hope to be on the Borough Council's agenda next Tuesday for that approval.
I want to ask Michelle, the testimony at the zoning hearing board, did it include the statements that, are you Mr. Jennings?
Yes, I am, thank you.
That Mr. Jennings just made about the process for drop-off and pick-up, that they'll be parking their vehicles and going into the front door to get their children?
There is significant questioning back and forth amongst the board and the applicant as to how that process would work, since they had similar concerns. Especially, their concerns are actually more towards the medical office for kids and how those children would be arriving, what that looked like. But I mean, there were questions overall as to, how are people getting here? What are they doing when they get on site? Are there concerns about parking, queuing, stacking, etc.?
And was the decision conditioned upon the use being consistent with the testimony?
All testimony and exhibits that were presented at the hearing, yes. And I have a full transcript, the stenographic report from the hearing.
Do you have any concerns about the queuing issue that Anderson raised in her letter?
Michelle or me?
Either.
I would defer to Jim.
If they're requiring parking in the parking spaces, no, but that was nowhere in the packet. So we would have no knowledge of what the testimony was at the zoning hearing. So if a condition is that they are going to require that all parents drop off and pick up from parking spaces, actual straight parking spaces, we don't have a concern. We have a concern if they're dropping off and queuing across and blocking 50 parking spaces.
Just so we know, you mentioned the square footage. How many kids are going to be there?
Which part? For the daycare?
Both places.
So daycare is about 175 students at max capacity. The healthcare for kids will vary. That medical dependent care varies throughout the day. It's not all full day. So I think their max is 60. They have a lot more staff relating to servicing those kids.
And this meets the parking criteria, correct?
It does. We've actually proposed a reduction in parking, which the zoning hearing board appreciated and found adequate for the site. So that's why we have a reduction in impervious coverage.
Is the childcare, is that offering transportation to and from elementary schools for the utilization? Some of the other childcares in the area, I'll pick up kids that drop off at after-school care.
I haven't discussed that with the operator, not to my knowledge though.
Understood, so we don't anticipate any sort of buses or larger vans that are gonna maintain permanent parking in those spaces?
Correct.
That was somewhat part of the testimony and questions that were asked by the zoning hearing board as well.
Are these school age children?
My understanding is no, they're younger.
To pre-K.
Pre-K.
But they still qualify for early intervention with BCIU from age 3. So BCIU come to do, we will transport to BCIU. I think kids might get OT, PT,
this are we referring to, I know it's confusing because there's two different uses here, but you have the healthcare for kid, the daycare use. So I assume the operator could address that better as that use comes in play. Is this a service that the community, that's provided by the community to county?
But we're happy to get that answer nailed down in advance of the borough council.
Well, it just goes more toward the transportation, that stuff.
Understood.
So, anything else to talk about? So, motion's needed to approve, table, deny, recommending the council grant a waiver from the land development submission requirements for material engineering modifications to 205 Bluefield Road.
I'd make that motion fine, but I'd also amend it so that the approval is also subject to compliance with Anderson's letter dated 5/2/24.
Including or excluding the queuing/stacking analysis?
Well, including your satisfying rural
I think your
engineer.
answer to that would be to write a letter staying. Your queuing stacking analysis would be as simple as all parents or guardians are required to park in a legal striped space, there's no queuing. I think that's the extent of the
So I
study.
wouldn't say that's an analysis,
I
but I
mean-
would say subject to his being satisfied,
application.
that
Satisfied.
concern has been met.
Makes sense, thank you.
That's my motion.
So that's going in the letter, and your motion was amended.
All right, shall I try my motion again?
That's what you said. What you said is
That's what you
fine.
said, I was seeking
Okay.
clarification, I
And
apologize.
this stacking issue is gonna be resolved by a letter to you.
A letter as opposed to a study or an analysis, yes.
Okay, good. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, do you have any questions? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Michelle, you got supposed to be looking for this.
No, I'm trying to squint to see, there are multiple attachments to open
For
in
this.
PDF for
Oh,
this
yeah.
meeting, so I'm trying to squint to see which ones I can get rid
Next one
of.
up.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
40 North Park Road.
Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Lisa Marie Coyne, I'm with the law offices of Coyne and Coyne, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant and the owner of the property. I'll stand out here so that we aren't turning around, I apologize for that.
One of them. This is the other shoot out here.
Okay, but, so we have with the team, we have the representative for the owner, Mr. Shabanic, we have the engineer and the surveyor here. First off, I'd like to respectfully request that the commission, with regard to discussion of the subdivision land development, that would be tabled in this evening's matter. What we're looking at is guidance and consideration for the conditional use application that is, I think, Delta D and E of your agenda. So as far as the background and information, I think I would turn that over to our engineer, here to make that presentation with some guidance.
Need a plan? Right here.
Afternoon, I guess, sure if we get the plan up on the screen, just to give an overview.
Which one is it?
There we go. Okay, just to give an overview, this is actually a sketch plan kind of leading into where the development of the property would progress to. We had submitted at the request of the owner in discussions with the borough, kind of a basic subdivision plan, which is not really something that's needed to follow through at this time. The overall intent, there we go. The overall intent is that D and E wing, in the future, be subdivided onto their own lot. There's then what we're calling the Phase 1 building, which would be a 9-story tower, mixed commercial use on the first floor with parking, and anticipated 260 units. In that sketch, we had also proposed location of the proposed access off of Spring Street. In part, that was discussions with emergency management and the owner as far as, just for addressing of the site. In the overall process and leading up to future land development plans, we've also conducted quite a bit of geotechnical testing on site. One for the proposed future buildings, which would be Phase 1 in this area. And then there are considerations on the final lot of the future development for a tower that would be roughly on the order of 300 units with mixed commercial use on the first floor as well. The results, just to give an overview of the geotechnical testing specifically related to stormwater, the site is underlined by karst geology, and the testing that was conducted resulted in a 0 infiltration rate. So just to give you a little background, the site soils are not real conducive towards stormwater, and with the karst geology, we certainly won't want to be pumping a lot of water into the ground anyway. But those items will come in more detail in the future. What we're here to really discuss today is the owner's been working on renovating both D&E wing. Essentially, it is my understanding that the E-wing building actually has a occupancy permit currently, and the D-wing building in the past did have a occupancy, I believe it was a Motel 6. There's some questions on essentially that portion is proposed to be as apartments, and certainly we're not looking to renovate any type of first floor for the mixed commercial use at this time. One of the items that the owner needs so that both D and E wing have adequate capacity for water usage is actually connecting into the main on Spring Street. So that kind of leads into the overview of the site. And Lisa, if you want to get into kind of the conditional use portion and questions that are in the review.
Sure, and we did receive the engineer's comments and questions. By way of background and history, the D&E wing has historically been utilized as apartments. Most recently, the changes in the E-wing when it was to be a Motel 6. The structure hadn't changed or anything like that, never really opened up in that capacity. So prior to the most recent occupancy permit, it was permitted for apartments. We have submitted some of the requested material from the review to include the market analysis, the deed, etc. What the property owner proposes is for the whole site, through the land development and subdivision process, is to incorporate the retail component on the first floor and the other buildings other than the existing two buildings to be utilized for apartments. So on the conditional use application that was submitted, the consideration was to come to the commission and obviously to Borough Council to ask for relief for that, and to also obtain the occupancy permit for the pre-existing use for that building as the apartments. That's it in a sort of in a nutshell on what the applicant is looking for relief for through the conditional use process. If you're to answer any other questions which the commissioner and staff may have.
For the planning commission's awareness, the conditional use hearing has been scheduled for Thursday, June 6th at 9:30 a.m. To clarify a statement a little bit, the D-wing was never officially permitted for apartment use. It came to the borough's knowledge much after the fact that the Reading Hospital had rented the entire D-wing to use for their nursing students to house them. So So you could effectively say it was being used as an apartment complex, but no official permit, so to speak, was ever issued for that, but I think Chris could weigh in on something was being done for a long enough period of time that, you know, you could effectively say it was a variance by estoppel.
And we're just trying to bring compliance here to the two buildings and the structures for
Yeah.
that.
We'll have to review the facts, discuss them.
But I was gonna say, in general, I think everyone sitting at this table that understands what an eyesore that property became and what a burden it was on not only the police, but also the fire department, would hopefully welcome with open arms any redevelopment that will change it to a much higher, better use for the community.
And we met with Mr. Chavanic and kind of went over all this, and we finally felt that to try and convert D and E to be a first floor retail, especially D, because it kind of steps down the hill, it wouldn't even be feasible. You couldn't salvage those two structures. And, you know, not that we, the Powell State Council does, but from our opinion, the two towers having the first floor of restaurants, office, and retail would meet the intention of what we developed for that overlay district. You know, but-
So the conditional use is for the entire property?
Strictly
Yeah.
for, the well, yes, but the D and E building specific.
Those two buildings, that's it.
Okay, all right.
But, and it would be that the resident, it would be that there would not have to put the first floor office, retail, restaurant, whatever else is lumped in there, because it would be put in the future Tower 1, Tower 2.
Okay.
Right, is that correct? That's.
That's
it.
That's exactly it.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear what we were actually.
Well, the big thing ended up being that the Motel 6, Building D, actually got a certificate of occupancy to be a hotel. So it got, I don't think they're really open as a hotel, but that got rid of the grandfather of the apartment use. E could open today on its own, because he's long standing as an apartment rental. But, and then we knew that they were gonna need the conditional use for for Tower 1 and potentially it's Tower 2 down the road, so it made sense to kind of try and clean this all up now for both D and E and down the road for the towers, so.
But we're not approving any.
We're not approving anything.
The future subdivision.
No, or land
concept
development.
is
Strictly a recommendation to council to consider approving the conditional use request.
for D and E.
Yes.
For D and E, and at this point in time, they would just be getting some building permits and then some, like a staff level site plan review for the new water, sewer, gas connections that Jim Babb in our office would review and issue those permits, so.
And
But that's
verifying
just
parking.
D and E.
Okay, all right.
And the only legal issue here is the avoidance of ground floor commercial retail. That's the only thing I see.
Right, because, exactly, and really just for building D, because E is an existing rental apartment type of, already has a CO for that.
Isn't the first floor requirement is some sort of dream of urban planners all over the place, and then when it doesn't make sense, it's usually 100% waived?
Well, I can tell you, it seems like a great idea on a reuse, but from somebody who tried to do it across the street from them, to getting the fire separation of office below, residential above, in an existing building is almost impossible.
Right.
By the time we tried to do that, we would have had to rip,
Yeah.
we couldn't use the office, we had to rip it all off.
The city has the same issue.
Yeah.
And
So
when-
that's why none of the upper floors are used.
When we
Yeah.
wrote that overlay ordinance, we envisioned someone coming in and wiping the slate clean on a property and starting from scratch, not trying to do adaptive reuse.
Kind of like what you're going from Tower 1 and
Yeah.
2.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Right.
And I guess one of the other clarifications actually from the letter, the ordinance permits up to 80% building coverage, only 10% coverage for impervious pavement, and then 10% open space. In this site, we have, and I forget the exact number, but our existing impervious is on the order of 85% of the site is existing impervious. In the future overall development, we're actually anticipating a slight reduction and certainly not increasing that with kind of the concepts we have at this point. So in kind of just a laundry list of cleanup as far as how we proceed in the future, at this point, you know, proposals that we would have, I think wouldn't quite marry up to the ordinance, but in our proposal, we would actually have probably a slight reduction from existing.
So Heath, how that's been looked at in, I think we've had 4 prior applications on this, some green sites, some redevelopment sites. If it was an existing redevelopment site, you weren't required to bring it back to that, but you couldn't increase.
Okay.
If you were increasing above what you had existing, then you had to get conditional use relief from council in order to do that. If you're decreasing the coverage, then you're bringing it more into compliance, and we previously didn't require any of the redevelopment ones to get any type of relief to reduce the coverage.
Okay, we certainly appreciate that clarification.
This is in redevelopment area 3?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
RAMUI or RAMUI 3?
So there is a legal requirement for the relief that they're seeking that it says the standard for approval of the conditional use shall be substantial evidence that the property can't be developed economically as a mixed-use project based on a written report indicating a current market analysis which shall be submitted with the conditional use application. I don't care whether it was with the application or not, but I want something to be
We
submitted.
said in our review that would need to be presented prior to or at the hearing.
Yeah, okay. And, you know, what I'm thinking, and I'm just thinking out loud about this is, you know, if your tower project is gonna include ground floor, retail, office, commercial space, then it might not be economically viable to have multiple buildings providing ground floor, commercial retail, commercial retail.
They'd be cannibalizing each other.
Right, exactly. So, you know, I think what your study might say is that, you know, we're gonna do this in the tower and that's all that this site is gonna be able to support. But we need a report. It has to be part of the record. So,
We had submitted the market analysis though, is what I understand. That had-
I don't have that pulled up, but that's part of,
that was-
I have a,
that's,
We submitted a recent market analysis for the rental market in Wyomissing that basically the conclusion was there's a deficit of about 700 units in the area. That's kind of what we were planning to use for instance.
okay, well, this, the issue is not whether or not it's good to have a solely apartment use. The issue is that it doesn't include ground floor office, retail, professional services, or restaurant use. So that's what you have to address by way of a written report. So I think you can satisfy that, but it is something we're going to need to receive as part of this conditional use application.
I don't think we got, can we waive it? I don't think we got this.
Well, we can make it a condition, but they have to present it at the conditional use.
Yeah, we can't, it's in the zoning ordinance, we can't waive it. Zoning hearing board could waive it, not the code council.
Excuse me, sir, I was listening to a couple conversations here. I apologize if you were asking me a
Well, I
question.
just am saying, we need something to satisfy that requirement of the zoning ordinance. You know, the entire section reads, apartment building use without ground floor office, retail, professional services, or restaurant use shall be permitted by conditional use pursuant to part 12 of this chapter, which are the general conditional use regulations. The standard for approval of the conditional use shall be substantial evidence that the property can't be developed economically as a mixed-use project based on a written report, including a current market analysis, which shall be submitted with the conditional use application. So, I don't care that it wasn't already submitted, but I think it needs to be submitted to support the application, and it needs to state what is required to be found. Right.
So we would ask consideration for the commission, and we'll certainly have that report with the required language in that for consideration by Borough Council during the hearing.
And again, I think the way to satisfy this with reference to the tower providing that on-site and that's all that this site can support in terms of ground floor, you know, retail, commercial, et cetera.
well, John James talks about what, commercial space.
Office space.
Office.
Yeah, commercial restaurant still has new, but office is pretty slim. If you have office, you have to rent it.
You know anything about that?
I thought I got mine rented.
Well, I think what you're saying is, as of today, you're not looking for any action on the land development plan, but you are seeking some kind of indication of support from the planning commission for the conditional use application, which will be heard by the borough council in
June
June.
6th.
Right.
June 6th, 9:30 a.m.
Is that before the next PC meeting?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
that's, next
the-
PC is
the
June
day
3rd.
after, or 2 days
Right.
after.
But in any event, I think it should be, this
Yes.
commission should take action on this and submit its recommendation to the borough council, so the borough council hears your position. You could do something with that. No, I would modify what's on the agenda to include a requirement that they submit that study that's required.
That's in our review, Chris, too.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you could adopt by reference McCarthy's review letter. That would be another way to do it.
Okay. All right, so what we're gonna do is, adopt by reference, the review letter to Jim McCarthy for 1040 North Park Road, as well as to, ask for a motion to approve, table, or deny, the grant of conditional use approval to allow the existing D&E buildings on the property to operate as apartment buildings without providing ground floor retail or commercial use, which will be provided at some time in the future to the engineer.
So I make a motion to recommend that council grant conditional use approval to allow the existing D&E buildings operate as apartment buildings without providing ground floor or retail or commercial use, subject to complying with McCarthy's letter dated 5/2/24.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something else?
So that is a combination of your item D and E then?
Right.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you all, folks. Very nice meeting you.
Planning modules.
Okay, this one is like, this deals with, I don't know if everyone in planning is well aware, I know what everyone in council is. All of the redevelopment we have going over on the Parkway Carter, that project, the apartments on Van Reed, the Boiler House, and Windsor Street townhouses, or I'm sorry, Windsor Street semis, and just to a lesser extent, Palmer. All flow to either the Fourth and Only pump station or Wynwood then to Fourth and Only, and those pump stations need to be upgraded. So as part of that, we have to do full planning modules, and then DEP requires the you don't have to throw it on the floor, right?
She's panicking.
The municipality fills out the municipal planning commission's, letter of consistency, it's a 2-page form, and that the borough manager signs that. Since we've reviewed all of these projects we've talked about at some level already, we were hoping to just clean that up because council wants us to move forward with getting the permits to upgrade these stations. So we would need a motion from the planning commission to authorize Michelle to complete and sign the form for the Boiler House, the Inn at Reading, the apartment Van Reed, projects. And Palmer doesn't need a planning module, so whether or not that's it.
Shouldn't these be subject to the developers entering into agreements for the financial guarantees?
This is just that it's consistent with our 537 plan and our zoning ordinance. But if you wanna do that,
Well,
this is the same as the county reviewing it and sending back the form filled out. I mean, the module doesn't go anywhere until we do the resolution at council.
well, I just know how we got tortured by the Highlands about the borough signing off the planning modules where we hadn't, made sure that the collection system was gonna work.
Well, you can do it, conditioned upon them entering into the agreements. The ones I mentioned have all given us the number of EDUs that they need and have all committed to entering into the agreement and paying in however the fashion council and determines they pay upfront all at once as they go.
Well, I think, can't we submit these modules to DEP with a notation that the approval by the borough is conditioned upon them entering into an agreement to pay for upgrades of the pump station?
We, the planning module approval for them will say, we won't have the part about paying or signing agreement, but they can't connect until the upgrades are done by the borough.
They're usually two separate things. The DEP planning deals with the DEP's approval and stuff, and then whatever agreements that you have with purchasing DEPs usually deals with, at least that's my understanding. Or that's where the agreements come in.
Because the module's still not going in for a while, but I figured we had an agenda and we're talking about a bunch of these projects now in a few weeks, let's get them out of the way.
If we have time, I'd rather put these agreements in front of them.
I would too, I told them all, they all had till April 26th to tell us what they wanted, and we know what they want, and I told them, you know, they had to get their council together with you on the agreement.
I would, if we have time and we're not reaching any deadline we have for submission to DEP, I would like to have a condition on this motion. This is a planning commission action, though, this doesn't go to borough council, is my recollection. Does this go to borough council?
Well, I mean, honestly, normally somebody, you hear city planning, they fill it out the form and sign it, and that's the end of that. But you don't have we don't have a planning director on staff to do it, so. And we've already seldom have a full planning module through the city.
These are full modules,
These
right?
are full planning modules.
120 days.
So it's 120 days for DEP to approve it.
They can recommend to the council.
That's what I thought.
And council.
No, this isn't go to council, this is just that Michelle signs the form saying,
It's a plan.
because it's a planning document that says, this is zone C1, you're allowed to have this used, this is zone, you're allowed to have this used, this plan is in conformance with our zoning ordinance. It's that, it's the
planning.
It's a planning consistency,
Yes.
form.
So we're approving the planning form before the form's complete.
Yes,
Okay, that's all I thought.
yes.
Or will the module, does the module come back to the borough?
Yes, the borough has to pass a resolution for each module individually.
All right, and that's not this. Okay, I'm content. I just don't wanna lose our leverage with the developer.
No, none of them are even gonna see this. This is gonna sit here waiting till all of the other stuff gets done.
All right.
But it's gonna save us from when we get those packets, losing a month to get these into DEP.
I'm
because-
okay with the proposed action by planning commission.
I'll make the motion that we authorize Michelle to sign.
Which is part B. That's it.
Second.
Correct. Part B, I won't read it, it's part B in the plan module section of today's meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. It's been a nice day, long day, it's overtime, same person.
Overtime.
Thank you.
Bill, here's the picture to which I referred. Has he closed the meeting? Hasn't closed the meeting.
That must have been